I lost my mother in September to mesothelioma from exposure to asbestos. And to me, this is very similar because we have both our government, federal, state, and local, all telling us this is not harmful, and we have industry telling us this is not harmful. That's the very same thing that happened with asbestos when they began using asbestos, and then we learn years later exactly what happens. And my family actually, suffered the consequences of that. My name's Pam Judy. I live in Carmichaels, Greene County, Pennsylvania. We moved into this home in 2005. For the first 3 years of our life, we had a wonderful life, and then 3 years after we moved in, there was a compressor station that went into basically our backyard. It's on an adjoining property owner's land, 780 feet from our home. I have 2 children, ages 27 and 21, and my husband. We live here.
Anytime natural gas is combusted, it's producing nitrogen oxides, carbon monoxide. Anytime natural gas is leaked to the atmosphere, that's producing methane. That's primarily what natural gas is methane, which is a very potent greenhouse gas. It's producing VOCs, it's producing hazardous air pollutants, things like benzene. So there are certainly emissions associated with this industry.
If you would look at where the last tree is in that fence row, I am right down over that hill.
And what's over here?
This is the compressor station. I said this is what I consider my piece of Marcellus hell. I don't use the word shale, I use hell. In June of last year, there was actually a study conducted by the Pennsylvania Department of Environmental Protection. One canister was placed in our backyard for 24 hours, and they found 16 chemicals in our backyard, 20 feet outside our door, some of which were benzene, styrene, toluene, hexane, heptane, acetone. There was literally a Molotov cocktail of chemicals in our backyard.
If you're only at a site for 4 days, 3 days, that's much different than if you live near one of these sites 365 days a year. The equipment they used often was not capable of detecting pollution at levels that would be a threat in terms of long-term exposure. Sometimes the equipment wasn't sensitive enough to detect pollution at levels that would be a harm for a short period of exposure.
And if you do a little research, I'm not a scientist, I'm not a biologist, but a little research on any of those chemicals will tell you that the symptoms that we are experiencing are all consequences of being exposed to those chemicals. Within a few short months of the compressor going online, we began experiencing headaches, sore throats, our noses, our nasal passages would burn. We have had, my children have both had nosebleeds. I particularly have had vertigo, was taken to the emergency room. My son has had, in November of last year, he was outside looking for deer, preparing for deer season, and was up in the general vicinity of the compressor station. And the next day, I started having some problems with his throat. That evening, the next day, he had blisters in his mouth that got progressively worse. And on Thanksgiving morning, he was in the emergency room because he couldn't eat or swallow.
The kinds of complaints that she reports, we often hear these kinds of complaints. I mean, I'm aware of easily a dozen individuals who have reported these kinds of complaints who live near compressor stations.
We had no notice that this was occurring. We woke up one morning, construction was underway, and before we knew it, it was online. That building did not go up until, it was not completed until the latter part of February, the early part of March of this year. It took me 2 years of squabbling with the gas company to get them to construct a building that would mitigate some of the noise. So you hear it now, you can imagine what it was like without anything around it. The windows in my house would rattle from the vibration. If you look at the GP5 permit, which this is permitted under, it clearly states that malodorous odors cannot go outside the confines of their fence. If I'm smelling them in my yard, they clearly are outside the confines of this facility. I plan to live here the rest of my life. My worst fear is that 20 years from now, they're going to determine that the exposure, and not just me, other people besides my family are experiencing the same situation. My greatest fear is that 20 years from now, they're going to say yes, or that we are going to develop a cancer that they are going to link to this. I see in Greene County, we are a very depressed county economically. I see the good that it has done, but I also see the harm that it is doing. They have to find a way to balance the two. I truly believe there's a safe way to do this, but I think we need to pull back. We need to look at what New York has done. New York is trying to get it right based on the mistakes made in Pennsylvania.
The industry is here. I think at this point, what we need to be doing is making sure, since it's here, that these companies operate as responsibly as it's possible. One way to do that is companies should be more frank about what the environmental risks are, what the public health risks are.
This is a battle that we're trying to fight now as groups that have gotten together as this does, as they have, or as, myself as an individual. It's exhausting. It is really exhausting. And I would hope that our elected officials would step up and start helping us instead of this being a fight that sometimes you feel as if you can't win.